Hello, everybody. I'm Heike from Legal Accelerators. Hi, Rowena. Hi, Ana-Maria. I will be very short. Just want to thank everybody for being here with us as the first edition of Legal Accelerator Talks. As you already know, today we will talk about remote working, legislation, and lawyers, a hot topic, especially due to the way we worked in the last 1 year and a half in the pandemic situation. We have today with us two great speakers, Rowena Hennigan and Ana-Maria Drăgănuţă. Rowena, a globally recognized remote work expert, and Ana-Maria, an old collaborator of Legal Accelerators, the founder of the marketplace Avoteca. I will stop here. I will let Rowena and Ana to start the subject. I'm sure it will be a very interesting hour about remote working. So, ladies, please.
Good morning from Gran Canaria. Hi, Anna. Lovely to chat to you again.
Hi, Rowena. Happy to be here again with you.
So Anna and I met, luckily in person. It's a luxury nowadays in Madeira, in the island of Madeira in May. So it's lovely to have the chance to chat to her again. And when we were there, we had lots of good, really animated discussions about remote work, about the impact on legal legislation, lawyers, the sector in total, as it's a really interesting sector of mine, and I have some clients in that sector as well. So Anna, tell the audience a little bit about where you're based and where you're from, in case they don't know you.
Yeah, so as Rowena said, now I am in Bucharest because I haven't been in Bucharest for the last months. I was in Madeira with her in this great digital nomad village, Ponta do Sol. A lot of sun and a lot of nice activities. Now I'm in Romania. I'm an attorney in the Bucharest Bar Association. I have my own practice here, and in the same time, I am the co-founder of Avoteca. It's a Romanian-based marketplace for lawyers and legal services. However, it's international, and we all work online. As we are all here today, yes, I am also working remotely. Yes, I consider myself half digital nomad because half of my time I'm here in Bucharest, half of my time I'm going in other places. And this is how I met amazing people like Rowena. So Rowena, how about you?
So I'm originally from, if you know your accents at all, the west coast of Ireland. I've got quite a soft Irish accent. I've lived in 13 countries. Spain is my 13th country. I'm there now with my family in Zaragoza, but currently joining you from Gran Canaria. So you please use the chat if you want to say hello. I'm in Las Palmas today for the summer. I move around quite a bit. That's how I got to go to Madeira as well. I do have a daughter, so I do it with my family, which is a little bit even more unusual. I've been remote working since 2007. I started off in telecommunications in a remote work contract with the telco back then. It's enabled me to travel to over 60 countries, live in different countries, as I said. But more recently, in the last 6 to 8 years, I've been working with the university in Dublin, and my academic research and practice has moved along into looking at remote and virtual teams and strategy for remote working. So that's how I came across Anna in Madeira. So that's a little bit of background to both of us. During the session today, as the title says, we're going to go from a macro to a micro view, Anna, isn't that right? We're going to try and comment on the pandemic working experience first. And this is something myself and Anna discussed in Madeira, and I know we had the luxury of being in Madeira, but it's become increasingly obvious, and luckily people have realized that true remote work is not only working from home. Wouldn't you agree, Anna?
Yes, totally. And you could see also for lawyers and legal industry that it was exactly the same. Definitely the remote work from the pandemic, it is not what we all want from remote work. And I remember our discussion after your training in Madeira that we were very much into this alignment that definitely we have to come and to see the differences and understand the advantages and disadvantages of pandemic and remote work, and how we can see remote work from now on compared to how it was in the pandemic.
Exactly. And when I started looking at remote work as a subject area about 4 or 5 years ago with my university, and we were looking at developing a course in the skills needed for remote work, little did myself and the academic team know that everything would be accelerated by the pandemic. So on one side, it seems positive, but there's been also, like Annie's situation, that's been forced, Anna, because people were forced home, organizations were forced remote, governments put in legislation that meant mobility, personal mobility was restricted. It hasn't been ideal. So there's been pros and cons. And also the same way, I'm sure lots of people listening enjoy working in a particular location or office, but they may have another favorite one or one they don't like for whatever reason. It's very subjective. And I have to say that fully remote working might not be for everyone, Anna. It's about choice. And this is why we're coming to this hybrid or blended model now coming out of the pandemic, because many people are missing human connection.
Yeah, exactly. And if it is to remember my experiences from the pandemic, being forced to work from home, it was not ideal because no one was prepared. You had to reconfigure your work and your life and your home in order to be able to work. And as lessons that I learned is that a good internet connection is always, you also have to be careful to have a good connection at home because you never know what happens. And wherever you go, this is one of the best things that you have to look for. Like, even if you want to go for a co-work, even if you go and you work from, how you said, maybe a cafe, maybe a library, you have to be sure that this internet connection is good. And another thing that the pandemic accelerated, I think, it's the communication skills that we all had to upgrade. If until now we were communicating directly and it's so much easier to make the other one understand what we want, at the moment we were at home and we had to do videos and lives and maybe even communicate in writing, things definitely changed.
Exactly. So that's actually what a lot of my work is day to day, apart from the university work. It's training private clients, doing consulting and training on those things you said, communications, the strategy for remote work, but also there's a whole load of other skills, collaboration. There could also be presentation skills at an advanced level. There could be tech skills that need to come in with new tools. Interestingly, management is impacted because managing remote or partially remote hybrid teams is different. Culture could be impacted in a company. But moreover, if we bring it back to the individual, Anna, this is the first link I want to share today for everyone. And it's about looking at, and it's a really accessible piece from HR Magazine, about the traits, the personality traits or the aptitudes that remote workers, fully remote workers would have had. This research is done pre-pandemic, everyone. And it's looking at things like problem solving, curiosity, conscientiousness. And Anna said it there, if you go to a library or a cafe and you've no internet connection, you're going to have to move again. We had suddenly everyone from home and companies, and they were being their own IT departments because they couldn't get support. So there's a raft of skills that go with that, but which might sound daunting. But I'm going to guess lawyers are quite autonomous people anyways by their nature, because they have to make decisions fast, often they have to act quick on their feet. And the plus side of this is that it fits in with that initiative and that leaning into being autonomous as a worker. So that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight, that there is research that shows those skills you need to be good at remote work.
Yeah, and as for the legal people, it's called like this. I think, many like the opinion overall on lawyers is that, they are very autonomous. They can do a lot of things alone, but we also are split into people that we like to be more on our own and people that fit more into a corporate environment, or people that fit more into a business, like an employee framework. So it really depends on how you fit and how fits to you. And this is where I think it's important to see that remote work can be different and can take different ways depending on you. And you shouldn't force the remote work into you, because you should take actually remote work and fit into your own life. And we could see that before the pandemic, lawyers, at least in Romania, denied in big proportion the technology because everyone was used to be face-to-face and no one saw the need of using technology. Once the pandemic came and the need was there, more and more of lawyers started to learn tech, to understand the benefits, and to want to actually know how to work remotely in a better way.
That's so true, and I'm going to pick up on one point you make there to sort of reiterate something really important, to make remote fit you. And I'd like to invite everyone that's listening and joining in to consider that if you educate yourself, I'm going to share a few different links, you might start to say, oh, like what we've been dropping in casually, Anna, I could be going to a library one day a week. Or I could maybe be doing 2 afternoons somewhere different, like a shared space, depending on my caseload, depending on my need to be in court or whatever it may be. So the world is becoming more flexible. And what you might find when you try these new locations, if you can, obviously you have to test internet connection. You may need to look at VPNs and data privacy and all of that, but you might find you work better. So whenever I had to do research pre-pandemic, research writing up, I would go to a library, for example, because I found, it's probably a hangover from my student days, that being in a library really helped me concentrate. So I really like that. And that's what I want to encourage people to think about leaving today. When I shared the different links, again, I'm an advocate, I'm biased. I've been doing this since 2007, but I really believe that part of my role today is to start to enlighten, to light the way for the legal industry to start considering as an industry, but also individuals to consider the benefits of remote work. So when we move on to sort of a macro view now, Anna.
Yeah, that is exactly what I wanted to ask you, because I saw how remote work changed the legal industry here in Romania and in Europe. So I'm curious how it's your vision from your research and from your clientele. What are the trends in remote work in legal industry, but maybe more global?
So I'm going to talk about Ireland first because it's the market I'm most familiar with. So on the courses I deliver with the university, we actually have a lawyer that delivers on the courses, Marion Jennings, fantastic woman who helped us build the remote work courses. So her responsibility is to keep up to date with Irish legislation because we're teaching Irish-based students jurisdiction. And even in the 2.5-3 years the course has been live, she's had to update all the content to the various reactions to the pandemic. So for example, the pandemic comes in, amendments were added to different contracts from a HR or legal perspective. But then also the Irish government, Anna, started bringing in new legislation. Okay, guidelines for right to disconnect, guidelines for, workplace safety when work from home, whatever. And each country, if you Google, sure, it's the same in Romania, but it's been very different in each country. So from a jurisdiction perspective, for my Irish clients, I have a set of slides that are via Marion that goes through those current requirements. And it also refers them carefully to seek advice if their entity is registered in Ireland, Anna, and they are employing outside of Ireland.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's definitely something that came up here as well.
Exactly. But what's been interesting is there's been a little bit of a sort of limbo time with the restrictions being slow to lift in certain countries. So, for example, Ireland is only lifting restrictions on the 22nd of October fully in the next few weeks. So we're going to see a lot of people returning to Ireland who actually technically were breaking the law with their employer. They were either individually or their employer was liable to corporate tax because they left Ireland quickly and went to a different jurisdiction during the pandemic. That seems in general to be waived from what I can see because the pandemic disabled them or didn't enable them to go home again. So that's one space I'm watching to see if anything comes out. Ireland did bring in, to comment on Ireland again, right to request remote work, Anna, legally about a year and a piece ago. And there's 1 or 2 cases that have come through with arguments on that. And that's beginning to go to tribunals and different legislation. So again, I've given you some hints. You could Google that if it's of interest. That's just Ireland alone. Then globally, every country has been different, but the European Union obviously is looking at different legislation. And what has started to happen is a sector has popped up called global mobility and remote work. That's what I'm calling it for now.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to pop into again, I want to give you as many resources as I can. I'm going to give you a compliance framework from one of my collaborators. This is a company I work with, the Work From Anywhere, Work From Anywhere team. And that compliance framework in itself is looking to be global. It's looking to lead the way from Work From Anywhere team to look at the different countries, to look at digital nomad visas, to bring all the issues together, Anna, that that are relevant. So hopefully that gives a bit of a macro view on that.
Yeah, and actually the thing that you mentioned, and I wanted to point it out, is the modifications that came up on the employment relations. And in Romania, you could see the biggest change that the pandemic brought is exactly this. If before people were just saying you can work remote, and they were this, lawyers had to find ways in the law so that employees can actually work remote, but not really, or to do maybe some contracts instead of being employed. Now the law came and said, now it is possible for the employee to work remote. And even more than that, the last modification was in the sense that you don't even need to write in the contract the workplace, because before the employee could work remote, but they were obliged to say where they were working remote, which was counterproductive. And another thing that I found it really, really important, it is the fact that the employee cannot be obliged to work remote unless he or she wants it. Because I think it's very important, as we talked about, for this model to fit you. So if you don't feel like working remotely, you shouldn't be obliged. And no one should oblige you to work remotely if you don't feel like doing it or it doesn't fit you.
Exactly. And actually, my first cohort of students 2 years ago on the Future of Work Skills module I ran for third-year HR students, about 2/3 of them, Anna, said that they did not want their first job to be remote, because at 20 years of age, 21 years of age, maybe some people joining can remember that, you got your social network through your first 2 or 3 corporate jobs. So it isn't one size fits all. There are certain jobs as well have to be done in person. I mean, I want to go hopefully to a hospital to have an operation. We can do medical calls. We can do certain things. Of course, we can digitally supplement activities, but there will always be certain job things that are better. Just like, meeting occasionally face to face, having events in a hybrid way where there's some people getting together. Believe me, it's better. As an academic, as a teacher, 9 times out of 10, I don't mind doing digital. I don't mind doing blended, but I would like to meet my students occasionally too.
Exactly.
So
Absolutely.
So it's a mix. But I think one thing that's worth pointing out here is that we spoke about the macro. We spoke about legislation. We touched on it. I am not a lawyer. I told that I would be saying this. But I do know, including that Work From Anywhere team that I've shared there, I do know a couple of really good, I do have one particular podcast I want to point you to from a well-known lawyer in the space who's called Bagashri. And I'm going to share that in a minute, because she recently did a really good interview talking about compliance, talking about different examples. So I'll pop that in chat in a minute, but let's keep going through the questions. So I think I've got one for you now, or do you want to ask me one? I'm just trying to remember.
I just wanted to point out a very interesting number that I wanted to tell to you, is that from 2020 to 2021, there's been 350,000 labor contracts with telework clause concluded more.
Whoa!
Just in Romania. So I thought it's very, very impressive to say it here.
Well, and that's really interesting. And did you have any idea of what increase is that, or percentage increase? Any other further detail on that?
No, I don't have it was not a proper research. It was just a question addressed to the institutions of labor work. And they said this because we have a national registry that anyone can ask their public information. I tend to think that first it was the pandemic, so everyone wanted to work remote, and after the changes, because now it was legal finally, so now things could have been regulated directly in the contract.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm wondering what your learnings have been, though. You said about making sure you had Wi-Fi. Is there anything else you would comment on in terms of your experience during the pandemic, in terms of being quite restricted in where you could work?
I think actually the pandemic and being restricted where I can work made me realize where I can work, and that I can work from everywhere, and that I don't need necessarily a place to be able to work. And even if it might sound small, but at the moment you just realize that you're not conditioned by anything, it's like an entire universe opens to you. After, of course, there are things that you have to learn, and you have to know that it comes with challenges. And as you said, there's these skills that you can learn. Some have them more developed, some not. But you always have to understand that if you want to, you can do it. You can work from anywhere, but you have to be prepared for different drawbacks. Like, as you said, the internet, like the fact that your laptop is breaking in the middle of, I don't know, your phone call. So you have to actually be prepared to do the Zoom by phone. Or that, I don't know, there is no internet on an island, for example. So what do you do? There's many, many things that you learn, and I think you learn by yourself. And you start to be very mindful of the others, because you know that everything can happen, and you try to be very mindful on the time zone, on the mood of the person, on what the person feels today, on their personal problems, because you see that life is not so black and white how we were taught to think.
That's a really good point, because empathy, a lot of leaders and a lot of leadership interviews have maybe come across it, have said, some leaders have said they built their empathy during the pandemic because they were seeing into people's
Absolutely.
homes. They were hearing about their grief maybe to do with the pandemic. But what you said there about knowing and managing yourself is really important, about that whole area of self-awareness. So I'm going to bring us on to looking at the organizational context. So this is linked between the organizational context and all the individuals that make up that legal practice, that legal team, or when we zone in. And one, again, bringing back to law, because lots of the links I'm sharing are related to law. Ireland has been proactive now. I live in Spain, okay? So of course I'm biased to Ireland, it's my country of birth, but they have been really quick on the policy, but not everyone is caught up in terms of the corporates, if that's making sense. So they were trying to bring in, actually, the right to disconnect while everyone was still working from home, right? When people weren't going back to the office, and they're only going back now in the next few weeks. But one thing that the audience might find interesting is this. And Anna, what you were saying about that, and I've commented in the chat about your really good self-awareness, that you know you have to manage yourself, you have to manage maybe different situations. For some people, depending on their personality, depending on their experience, depending on their COVID experience, maybe something's going on with their family, whatever, there has been a lot of stress. Okay, So I really wanted to shout that out clearly. I have a nice article I'll share in a minute on the finance sector in Ireland, which is again, not exactly legal, but not unsimilar, is recording a lot of stress. There's been a lot of research that, yes, there's lots of positives, but for some people, they overwork working from home, Anna. They stay longer at the computer. They don't disconnect. They don't have that work-life balance. I'm in a co-working today, everyone, because I get to commute. And if I commute, it's much better for my work-life balance, for my approach to work. And it's simple little things like this that you only learn through experience, but also the employer in the Irish market is being advised to bring in these guidelines, to bring in this support for right to disconnect, like supporting their staff and turning out of office on, knowing how to do it, supporting their staff on maybe disabling email or disabling servers over the weekend, however they choose to implement it. But that again might be of interest to some of the people joining, because that's advanced on, and my clients are just trying to catch up with that and how it would be actually actioned in their organization.
It's very interesting that you pointed out about the right to disconnect, because so now I'm recording a podcast about remote work in legal, and actually Banglisha is one of the guests. And in my interviews, it came a lot this problem, let's call it like this, in the way that many of my guests left their previous work because they were not given the right to disconnect. So because the pandemic forced them to be home, but because their employers didn't know how to deal with that, they were considering that if you're home at 8 and if you're home at 1 p.m. is the same thing. So it's normal for them to call you at 8 p.m. It's normal to require from you some task at 8 p.m. And I think this is a big issue that employers and corporations that go to remote work and implement remote work policies should have in mind. It's one of the key. What is your task? What is your program? And when and how you have the right to disconnect. And I think another important thing that maybe the policies should have in, it's the environmental impact on this work, remote work. What do you think?
Oh, definitely, because research has even shown that people stopping the commute, apart from them feeling healthier because they're not commuting and they've more family time, because some people, for example, outside Dublin would have been commuting 3 hours a day. I'm not sure what the case is in Bucharest with commuting, but that there was a big improvement in employee sentiment from also knowing they decrease carbon emissions. Okay, so there's a whole related to that, more quality lifestyle. I mean, this is what flexible work is all about. So the environment really links in on that, and we've sort of tangented nicely into the overall business case. So before we go into the business case for remote work, and that would be, Anna, if a client came to me and said, I'm a traditional legal set of partners with 4 offices in the UK and Ireland, and we want to bring in a remote policy, we want to build a business case, and I would help them build out that business case. And it wouldn't just be on the finances, okay? It would be looking at other touch points where they can also justify return on investment. So the first thing I want to share on that is the leading person on this is not me. It's a wonderful woman called Kate Lister, who I've been working with for a few years in the States. And Kate has developed a calculator that I've shared there with everyone that can look at the workplace savings that can be made. It's US calculations, but it would give you a framework to start with. So if you were taking your team or your practice, you could start looking there. She also factors in her calculator, which you can get access to through logging onto the site, the environmental savings, which could, of course, knock on to carbon emission targets. So, Anna, I don't know about Romania, but that is certainly very pertinent in Ireland. So some of the clients I'm working with, I am not just talking to the head of operations, the head of HR, I might get the head of CSR or the environmental officer coming in as well, because they've been challenged with decreasing carbon emissions, which they can do through decreasing commute time and perhaps downsizing office space as well, as part of creating this business case and moving to a model. So that's maybe enough said on that, unless anyone has specific questions. I did want to pop a word in, and I hope I spell it properly, because I am actually, my first English, believe it or not, presenteeism. My first language is not English, so my spelling is not great. I actually speak Gaelic bilingually, but this is presenteeism. I think I've spelled it right. I didn't get autocorrect.
This reminds me of the conscientiousness that we talked about.
I'm so conscientious, but I also want to get my point across, and I know that hopefully people will listen carefully and figure it out. So being present in the office, you said, Anna, the opposite is absenteeism, yes. But presenteeism is often also considered the opposite business model to being remote. So interestingly, Anna, you said earlier, to join some dots there, you said, oh, if someone's in the office from 9 to 5, they do their work from 9 to 5. But if someone's there at 8 p.m. at night at home, why is it we're expecting them to also be doing work and available? Which again leans into that right to disconnect. So in terms of research here, the really key factor is trust.
Trust, which we found very, very few before the pandemic, and now everyone was forced to show trust to everyone because you cannot work without trust. Like I know that even in Romania, they were the main argument against remote work was the fact that you are not there to see what your employee is doing, which for me it doesn't make sense, because you have to trust the person that you're employing. If not, I don't even know why you are employing that person.
So true, Anna, but I have a couple of international clients where hybrid, some of their jurisdictions, their countries, they're global, using employer of record services, and I can explain that in a minute, using either a model where they've got entities in every country and they're going remote or hybrid in those countries, but some of them have entities in Asia. And for example, one of them, the Chinese Shanghai office, is completely back in office, 100%. There's no change from pre-COVID, because we're talking about a culture where presenteeism is integral in the culture of the country.
Yeah, and coming to that, it would be interesting to join the dots and maybe discuss a bit in a global discussion about the pros and the cons of remote work. Mm-hmm. Because we discussed it a bit there, a bit here, and we touched the pros, we touched the cons, and I'm thinking to make a global discussion about that. How do you see it?
So like any business, legal, organizational strategy, if it's planned, brackets, and not forced like the pandemic, a transition to any type of remote model, and when I say any type, it could be part hybrid, co-located, maybe you've got a one day flexible a week, it can be any mix of it, any version of it, has to be transitioned slowly, it has to be planned. It has to be strategically bought in by management, and then it has to be implemented with various strategies. Of course, Anna, you could say the same at a government level. If we talk about Romania or Ireland, a government can bring in these policies, but they have to supplement them with documentation, with guidelines, with support for them to actually become actionable, implemented, and worthwhile. A huge part of this is education. A huge part of it is training and skilling, often, because we can't assume people know how to have conversations like you and I are having. I try and demonstrate best practice with everything I do. So you'll see me using chat to highlight automatically the key words that I've been verbally saying to you. It's an international audience. I have to make sure that I can get that across. So the cons are that lack of awareness of what it really takes. That's one of the cons. The cons are maybe the local legislation, depending on your entity's location and jurisdiction. The cons are also the globalization of markets and the fact that in certain sectors, I can comment specifically on technology because I've got a lot of technology clients, we've got a massive talent war at the moment and a massive shortage. That's a con for some organizations. Retention are a con. The con is also health and well-being, Anna, and we've already mentioned it. Misunderstanding what remote is, putting someone in a box room in an apartment, leaving them there to figure it out. Maybe remote's not for them, maybe they're not supported. And burnout is a real issue, and it can have dire mental health consequences if it's left. I have to emphasize that coming out of a pandemic where we already know mental health issues are on the increase. So started with the negatives. There's one other one I want to be really honest about. There can be massive environmental benefits to remote work. We've spoken about decreased office space, regeneration of rural areas like in Madeira. We've spoken about carbon emissions. But no one is quite sure yet about the impact on server farms, Anna.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is one of my concerns every time I'm thinking about remote work and working from a computer.
Yes. So that's an area that again has been challenged in these last 2-3 years with the pandemic, and there's beginning to be research coming out on that, and some of the initial work research is not that encouraging. It is showing that if we do all go remote that there is going to be more servers farms. So what needs to happen is the hardware's use in these servers farms needs to be optimized for the environment. So I want to add that in. So that's one that it's not completely clear. So when we talk about environmental benefits, I'm holding my hand up and saying that's one that we're not sure of. Benefits, though, are flexibility, better work-life balance if you're doing it well, choice of moving location. Let's just look at Romania alone. And Anna and I spoke about the beautiful rural locations in Romania. I know Romania a little bit. There can be rural regeneration from spreading out. If someone only has to commute in to Bucharest 2 days a week, can we build local communities again and spread the wealth? Can we open up markets and regions more to remote work? I'll give you a personal example of that, Anna. I work a freelancer model with some of my team. I am currently employing a refugee freelance who's based in Ethiopia, and he's a refugee from Eritrea who's gone through a training course in remote skills, and he's managing my website for me. So I'm basically helping a refugee who has refugee status feed himself and his family. So these are the other things. These are the other things that can be benefits. There can be cost savings. There can be advantages to retention. There can be all these things. There can be really good company culture. But like everything that's worthwhile, it takes time, planning, education, and effort.
Yeah, definitely. And when you said about people that commute, I think this is one of the very biggest advantage that remote work will allow people to live in less expensive zones, to bring birth again to new places, and you don't need to stay anymore in big metropola where everything is expensive with some salaries that don't suit you. And if yesterday I participated to a webinar and there was a questionnaire there, a poll between the participants, and 60% of the participants said that they prefer to have their schedule every day remade based on their own program, and they do not prefer the 6 to 9, or they don't prefer to suffer someone to tell them what to do. And that's impressive if 60% of the poll people said that they prefer to make their own schedule. This means that they prefer to choose where to live, they prefer to choose how to have their life, and they prefer to choose what to do in life. And this is where I wanted to go to 3 things that I think it's important to think about if you're going remotely. One, that you have to be very organized, as you said, and you have to have a plan. You can't just go from one day to another. I don't care, I don't know, I go remotely. Second, to be really, really careful on your mental health and have some rituals to get you out and get you in the work. And 3, to be mindful of the other people around you. What do you think how do you see this as a global trend?
I totally agree on all that. Those 3 things are covered off in the university courses and often the training I deliver. I often start exactly with that self-awareness. I complimented you in the chat on it earlier. I feel familiar that I know you, and I know you're self-aware, and even that you're commenting on what you need daily as a remote worker. What you need to look at, what your team needs, Anna, what people need to interact with you. Like I often start off engagements with clients where I ask, what would be the best way for us to communicate over these first couple of weeks of the project?
Perfect.
What would be the best way? What are your regular? I have a checklist of 5 or 6 on a document questions. You might, if you were going in to meet people in person, see those things, but you have to be more intentional. You'll hear this word asked a lot, are used a lot.
Intentional.
In your communications, your interactions, your business networking, Anna, even virtually, what we're doing today, how I'm using chat, how I might say to everyone who's hopefully still, lots of people still joined in, how I might encourage them to ask questions by saying, I'd love to hear your questions. I always have pen and paper. I always have ways that I can draw, that I can use my props. I hopefully speak slow enough or type into chat. So I'm not saying, a lot of people have learned that through default, but believe me, there is a community out there. I'm part of a big community. There's a Slack community of advanced trainers, facilitators, and participation experts in the world of remote work. And what we're looking at is trying to build that global community of knowledge so that if mediation, Anna, was happening with a lawyer involved on a Zoom or virtually, that there would be good articles, good information. That lawyer would feel that they could show empathy, show good active listening skills, for example, in that type of session. But all of that is only if you as an individual, and we're coming back to this again, have done that self-awareness piece where you're looking at your skills day to day and saying, what do I need to work on? What do I need to improve? And maybe you need to do that with a mentor, or maybe you need to do that with someone who can give you feedback, which we get through mentorship, which I know exists in the legal industry. I have my own mentors I work with. And also, it also gives you accountability, because I have a mentor at the moment for one particular business project, and she's the one who'll come back to me and say, how are you getting on? I
think especially when you're working alone and when you're self in the business, you definitely need someone to keep you accountant. You need a second party that will be there for you and will bring you up when you're down and will tell you, hello, have you done that? You said you will do, so let's go to work. Because when you are in teams, even if you work remote, you know that maybe at a specific day you have a Scrum meeting or you have meeting with colleague X. So you are kept accountability by the team. But if you are alone, I think mentorship or advisory, it's definitely a good start and a good continuation in your development as an individual, in remote work especially.
Okay, totally. And I think that, ongoing, but this is where performance reviews, I don't know how performance reviews, that maybe something you could comment on, would look like currently in Romania in the legal industry. But within the established remote work world, and that's where I will be benchmarking from these companies like Zapier, Automatic, Doist, performance review nearly are 80% of the time done remotely, with perhaps 2 or 3 big meetups a year. And there is a really different way of doing that. The trust, the vulnerability from the very start, the candidness between a manager and one of their team members in terms of either giving that coaching, giving that sort of performance review, but also a lot of these companies have mentors as well that they can supply in to help support people build out their skills or find their career progression, or even manage a challenge like work-life balance or burnout or whatever. So I'm just checking the time, and I think we've worked through most of our questions, haven't we, more or less? I'm just going to
I just wanted to ask one last thing, because you came up with a lot of research, and I think this is one thing that stands out from this talk, is that finally we have some research in remote work, and finally we have some research in remote legal work. How do you see the future of remote work from now on?
I see the next couple of years as being really, really important, because what I think is going to happen, and it's interesting because I think, speaking to a legal audience, a lot of you, I know you work as partners, a lot of you will be working in practices, but like as Anna has done, you can become entrepreneurial, you can innovate, and you can come up with a company, or you can go sort of independent, like what I've done. And I think what's going to happen is that there's a lot of talk about the great resignation coming out of the pandemic. But what I think is going to happen is remote work is going to start to blow traditional business models up. Okay, so let me expand on that. And it'd be interesting maybe for you to add from a legal sector's structure. Because, for example, I can work to a university in Dublin as an international supplier and as adjunct faculty, which was never possible 5 years ago. That's changed in the last 2 years. I know 2 other lecturers who can do the same. That's changed recently. As long as I'm working through their servers, I can still invoice and get paid. It's still all legal. In terms of for example, I can set up freelance, I can bring on freelancers. I don't have to set up employment contracts at the moment with the freelancers I have. Cloud hiring, cloud freelancing, there's all these areas. So business models are expanding, they're merging. And that's what I think is going to be really interesting, because within that, I hope because I know a little bit about Romania, so I hope it really expands entrepreneurship.
I think in the legal world, this is one main thing that will happen. More and more entrepreneurs from the legal field will start to emerge, and more companies will want to bring the legal field at a modern age, and remote will just make it easier. And if we can talk, so of course there's discussion about entrepreneurship in legal and law offices, and even in law offices there will be some sort of modernization, because just think about one side. You don't have to employ or to work anymore with people from your city. Of course, if we don't talk about court and presentation in court, everything that can be made online, you will have access to an immense pool of talent, and not only locally, but also, let's say, nationally, at least for lawyers. So this will be a game changer for sure.
And that opens up a whole other discussion in terms of entrepreneurial skills and the skills that that you might need. The ones I've learned over the last few years, doing your own accounts, marketing, maybe managing a freelance team. But I wanted to direct it that way because I see, and there's actually a really good book I can recommend on that, actually, that I'm going to pop in the links. I see that it's called The Human Cloud, which might sound like a strange name for it, but it's about this emerging freelancing. Everything is going to be, a lot, how change makers can use both AI and the cloud to hire and look at a freelancer model. So I'll pop that into the chat as well. So I just want to see if there are any comments or questions. I didn't notice in the Q&A. Very quiet in the Q&A. So we still have quite a few people on there. So I just want to give it a chance if people do want to ask a question in the last few minutes, Anna, or yourself, if you if you want to ask. And otherwise, we're welcome to take anything in chat or on the Q&A part of the system. Any last comments, Anna?
Yeah, I would want to ask you, how is it that you chose to go remotely I don't know, when you said 10, 15 years ago?
Well, my personal story, if we've got any parents listening, my personal story was initially remote for choice, for travel, for nomadism back in 2007. But my recent move to remote 7 years ago was because myself and my family leaving Ireland, leaving Dublin to move to Spain, was actually due to health issues. My daughter has had past tense severe asthma. So on a personal level, we moved to a warmer climate, not completely out of choice because we had to. We were actually struggling with our quality of life with my daughter's health. So thankfully, she's fully recovered. Spain has a wonderful health system. But again, it gives you an angle of what could be the benefit of remote work. When I listed the benefits, Anna, just from an equality perspective, there's a lot of research as well coming out. I mean, I mentioned refugees, and I'm working with one myself, but there's a lot of research coming out that remote work is a big enabler for access for disabled people. I know I have a couple in my network. For women staying in the workforce when we talk about gender pay equality and equality in general. To cancel ageism, which can also, as we know, be a challenge for some people. So it can be the great leveler. And for me, as a working woman, I would have lost my career if I couldn't have moved country, got my daughter better. And that's why I started my business. So that's that's why my passion is so real.
So let's take this question from the organizers. How difficult was it to go to this road?
How difficult was it to go through this road? Well, I think personally for me, and we've spoken about this, Anna, I think especially in a new country, so contextualizing it to a new country, and maybe someone listening is thinking of moving home or regionally in Romania and wants to work from home and maybe travel occasionally to Bucharest, I would really encourage you to look at shared spaces, cafes, co-working, shared offices that you could use if you're used to social interaction, but not just social interaction routine. Because if you're better if you get up and go out of your home, and it's been called mimic the commute during the pandemic, you need to know that about yourself and look for it. So whether it's going down to a library, whether it's finding a shared space you can look at, use. That for me was really important when during the pandemic, I was sharing space with my 6-year-old, which was not ideal. Lots of noise, lots of naked running around behind Zoom calls, which is why I'm in a co-working today. But yeah, it was difficult for me, but one of my biggest solutions is look at where you work from. Look at your workspace setup. And coming out of COVID, you will have options. So please don't feel that your kitchen table is your only option. You have options. So it was difficult, but one of my best pieces of advice is looking at that co-working or different place to work from. And then, Anna, as we've already mentioned, but to really highlight it, find peers, talk to Anna, find other lawyers that are working remotely, ask them for a coffee chat, ask them for a chat in person, bring them for a coffee in Bucharest. And, then you have your mentoring support in your community.
And this is where I wanted to leave the audience with one last idea, especially if we have lawyers that listen to us and want to go remote, but don't know how. My biggest challenge was actually the mindset of the others. And this is what I had to overcome the most, because I was told a lot that it is not possible, that I'm dreamy, that it's not for remote. So this is something that I want to leave lawyers that want to go remote with. Don't listen to this. Listen to what you want. Find a good working space, find a mentor, find an advisor, make a plan, and for sure you can do it.
That's really sound advice. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. So I think this is all for our chat. I think we came to an end.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rowena. Thank you, Anna. Great discussion. As you already said, and I don't want to make any conclusions because, as everybody knows, we will continue this discussion in the Legal Accelerated Conference in 24-26 of November. So the discussion will remain open, and thank you once again, and see you at the next Legal Accelerators Talks and at the conference at the end of November. So thank you and have a great day.